Hello, thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be discussing three important topics within the IBM Urbancode Deploy application. We're going to be talking a little bit about model-driven deployments and their effects on inventory and also compliancy. So when we talk a little bit about model-driven deployment, what we're really saying is, what is our desired inventory? When we start to design applications and deploy individual components, part of our job is to pick specific versions of those components and where we want to deploy them to. And that's going to be the basis of our desired inventory, or what we refer to as the model. We'll then show you how to deploy those individual components and what types of effects they have on inventory and how that inventory relates to compliancy. All right, so let's take a look at the user interface. And we've just mentioned a bunch of different topics. We're talking about model-driven deployments and how model-driven deployments feed into inventory and this notion of compliancy. So what we're seeing here is an SIT environment that currently has version 1.0 of all of our components deployed into this environment. Right? If we wanted to change this, we'd have to come up with a new model. And defining that model is the basis of our model-driven deployments. So let's say we wanted to change part of the Jpetstore web component. Right? So the first thing we need to do is define what is our desired inventory. Right? And this comes out to be the beginning part of this model-driven deployments. I can come in here and choose that I want version, in this case, let's just say 1.1 of the Jpetstore web component. Right? Now, when we deploy this, it's going to take that desired inventory, the 1.1, and attempt to deploy it into our SIT environment. So let's go ahead and click Submit. And then as this runs, if everything is successful, we would expect our actual inventory to show the Jpetstore web component having deployed version 1.1 into the SIT environment. All right, so this should only take a couple of seconds. And if our desired inventory matches our actual inventory, then we get into the idea of being compliant. Right? So let's go back and take a look now at our application and go back and look at our SIT environment. And we can see now that we have version 1.1 of the Jpetstore web component in the SIT environment. So we've updated our inventory with version 1.1. Everything worked successfully, and so we see here that we're actually compliant, 3 out of 3. So what does compliancy mean, and how do we determine if we're compliant or not? One of the main misconceptions here is that the compliancy actually reflects the number of components that are being deployed into an environment. In this case, we have 3 components. They've all 3 successfully deployed. Therefore, our compliancy is 3 out of 3. This is actually incorrect. In very simple models where a single component maps to a single resource, this may be true. But for more complex environments, let's say a production environment, you may have the same number of components, but many more deployment targets. Right? So in a production environment, I may have 30 or 40 or even more servers that need to deploy to. And this is actually where we get this notion of compliancy from. This 3 out of 3 means we've successfully deployed our components to the 3 target servers we've defined. So let's take a little bit more of a look at that. If I drill down into the SIT environment, we'll get a look at our resource tree. And we can see there are 3 different agents that we're deploying to. The SIT app agent, the SIT DB agent, and the SIT web. All 3 of these have the correct versions deployed to them. So over here we'll see an inventory column, and we can see that the app has version 1, the database version 1, and the web version 1.1. So this is basically showing us that our desired inventory matches the actual inventory, and therefore we are fully compliant. Now, the tool does some pretty neat stuff. We might, for instance, add a new agent with another component. And if we don't deploy to it, it'll show us that we're out of compliance. So let me show you what that looks like real quick. If we were to add, let's say, to our overall resource tree, another group, and let's just call this the jar component. And perhaps within here we'll add another agent. And lastly, we'll add a component to it. And let's just go ahead and we'll add the Jpetstore App Component. So now I've added a whole set of a new resource to this. So instead of there being 3 agents, there's actually now 4 agents, right? And if we go look at our environment, what we can now see is that we are out of compliance, right? We've only successfully deployed to 3 of the 4 agents represented in our model. And we can see that the app component is actually non-compliant because only 1 of 2 of those resources have been successfully deployed to. And again, the one that's not deployed to is the one we've just added here, right? So that's overall the entire concept of inventory and compliance. Inventory is going to show us what versions of our components are deployed to which resources in an environment. And compliance is going to tell us if anything's missing, right? Overall, at the end of the day, when we run a deployment, we want to see that we're completely compliant. Any non-compliance, we should be able to come in here and see exactly where we're non-compliant, right? So here I can expand this, and it will actually tell me that what we're missing is a version of the Jpetstore app. Thank you for joining us today as we discussed model-driven deployments and its effect on inventory and compliancy.